Today's determined attackers easily bypass even the most advanced network defenses. Trying to ramp up staff to detect their backdoors can cost thousands of dollars and take months, even years. With Active Countermeasures AI Hunter, we enable junior analysts to detect even the most advanced backdoors in a matter of hours. Sign up for a demo and purchase our product today by visiting activecountermeasures.com/PSW. Active Countermeasures. Make every analyst a hunter.
Endgame's converged endpoint security platform is transforming security programs, their people, processes, and technology with the most powerful endpoint protection and simplest user experience, ensuring analysts of any skill level can stop targeted attacks before information theft. Endgame unifies prevention, detection, and threat hunting to stop known and unknown attacker behaviors at scale with a single agent. For more information, visit endgame.com. Organizations' internal networks are overly permissive and can't distinguish trusted from untrusted applications. Attackers abuse this condition to move laterally through networks, bypassing address-based controls to spread malware. Edgewise abstracts security policies away from traditional network controls that rely on IP addresses, ports, and protocols, and instead ties controls directly to applications. Edgewise allows organizations to analyze the network attack surface and segment workloads based on the software and how it's communicated. Edgewise monitors applications and protects data paths using zero trust segmentation. Visit edgewise.net/Security Weekly to get your free month of visibility. Some restrictions apply. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. My announcements are all messed up in... it's on demand. We can just skip that for now. We're just going to jump right into it. Mr. Don Murdock is here with us. No stranger to the show, as we remember not just Don's great content, but more so what are those called? Veggie Tales. I almost called them veggie straws. That's horrible food. It's a horrible snack.
Really?
I wouldn't call
you
it
think
a
I'm
food.
horrible?
I don't know.
I love veggie straws.
Veggie chips and veggie straws are delicious, Paul. I don't know.
They're really good.
If I've been drinking and I got like a little bit like munchies, they're good. Other than that, it's not my first go-to.
Oh, definitely not your first go-to because they're veggies.
Right?
You know what you need with it is hummus. Right. Just like some chipotle hummus.
I agree. With hummus, absolutely. Yeah, we're way off.
Speaking of way
off base. Are we doing an interview or are we talking about snacking tips?
Snacking tips. Speaking of way off base, this has been a great week testing for my black belt this Saturday. And, you're supposed to carb load before you go into like a marathon or something like that. Yeah. No, it's my birthday this week, so I'm carb loading all week.
There you go.
Out with the diet. Like, this week has been amazing. And
carbs.
Like karate. Mostly taekwondo. So
my 5'4" wife has a black belt in Aikido.
Oh, nice.
I made it halfway before I had a foot injury and I had to stop.
Oh, yeah. I've had my share of pseudo minor injuries, and getting older doesn't help it any. But
yeah, so
Veggie Tales.
Don, for our audience, if you introduce yourself as well as what your role is today as the assistant director at Regent. Did I say that right? Regent University Cyber Range.
So thank you. So I'm an IT person. I've been around in the security business now since about 2001, and what I'm doing now at Regent is really taking the vast majority of that security career that kind of began working at a Virginia university. That's where I got my combat training. And then I spent several years in the corporate sector, hiding behind a corporate firewall with lots of great defenses, doing employee investigations. And, then I spent a couple of years in a Fortune 50 company running strategy and planning and doing a lot of the strategy and planning for the technical security team. And I've taken all that, and now since I've got this gray hair thing going on, I'm now in a position where later in life I'm looking at it and it's like it's time to give back. So a great position at Regent came up to be the lead scenario designer and basically instructor coach at Regent to take people through the cyber range environment that we have, and that's what I'm doing today. It's a class, but it's also adversary simulation, and it's a real environment, and we actually get a chance to deploy real attack tools, and you can modify the environment left and right and engage a simulated enemy, if you will. And it's a whole lot of fun. I get to put all that stuff that I've learned, I get to put it in place and practice and then coach people through it. Sit down with people and say, you turned off the primary database server account without checking with your site personnel. Was that really a good idea?
Of course it is.
Yeah.
And the cyber range, is what kind of technology is that? Is that like virtual machines or?
Oh yeah. We have an EMC platform that is ridiculously fast. Basically we have about 50 operating systems and 16 segments, all separated by VLANs. And so we have the same environment duplicated 4 times for master templates. We start up the templates, run the scenario, and then with a push button feature, we can revert the templates to a known good baseline in about 5 minutes, change the scenario a little bit. We do things like, you saw how this malware did its thing, but the Windows 7 target was poorly instrumented. So let's now turn on really high quality system-on instrumentation and coach you through actually analyzing it with PowerShell so you can pull data out more readily and more rapidly. So the student gets this, I figured it out the hard way and it took me 2 hours. Now I'm figuring it out the more sophisticated way that, when you're doing this every day, you develop these habits and you flex these muscles. How do I figure it out now? And I use an automated, faster fashion, and how they answer the question on the scenario.
And is this where a lot of the inspiration for your book, Blue Team Handbook, the Incident Response Edition, came from?
No, actually, the Incident Response Edition came from looking at all the things that I'd done in my career and writing it down, and then turning it into a book. The inspiration for this current book, though, that I actually sent you guys a copy of, came about before the first handbook I ever wrote. It came about in 2011. We had a SIM product, and the relationship with that vendor kind of, the most polite way of saying is it became very strained and it failed. So we replaced them with a different product, another Gartner upper right SIM, which we really liked, and really liked the guy who came down and helped us implement it. But we really wanted them to be successful, and we wrote 37 formal use cases like the one in Volume 2. We wrote 37 of these for a total of 497 pages of documentation. And within 12 weeks, Art from the company, he was capable of, he'd originally thought we were going to get 26 of them done. He got 29 of them done, and then did 4 or 5 other collateral things within 12 weeks. And so essentially what I'm saying is he was on budget, meaning he got the work done in the allocated time. We over-delivered because we had more use cases implemented. And these were custom use cases specific to our environment, not just show me the antivirus activity and do a long tail analysis of it. No, it was connect this with this, and that's a customized use case. We had 29 of those done. And then he did 5 other really neat things along the way that we kind of talked about and exploring with him that were really significant time savers for us. So I looked at that and I said, we've really got to do something with this. And the firm actually liked my use case template so much, which is the one that's in the book. They now have used it. They've been using it for 5 years in their consulting practice. And I ran into some of their security engineers recently at a Gartner event. And I said, hey, are you guys still using that template? And they're like, you're the guy who came up with the template? And I said, yeah. He goes, oh, we use it every day. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, obviously I did something right.
That's awesome.
Really
so Don, what's the difference between the books, the Blue Team handbooks that you have?
So,
well, explain to people the 2 of them first, right? And then the differences.
So you've got, one thing, their size, right? This one here, that's the proof cover. This one is really all about, you're in an incident, you have to have commands that you run, you have to write an incident response report, you have to do all kinds of things on the command line, and it's very tactical. I mean, literally I carry it with me because if I have to go through an incident, I want to have my command stuff, and I want to know what I'm going to do, and I want to know what I'm going to write up. And there's some space in the back for notes for like your own organization, like your call tree.
I remember that one.
Go ahead.
I remember that one.
Yeah. Yeah, you saw it. Right?
Yeah, I may have been one of the reviewers of that.
You did. And you were actually really instrumental because you came back with about 5 things. And basically it was, if you talk about it this way, you're going to embarrass yourself. And I said, oh, okay.
But I said it a little bit more
honest,
tactfully
that's
than that, I think.
Yeah, it was really good stuff. And the second book is it's really all about sharing my life and professional experience implementing SIM, building SOC, and doing threat hunting before there was such a thing as threat hunting. I've been doing what today you guys know of as threat hunting. I've been doing since 2007, really. Analyzing that data, trying to find the outliers, trying to find the oddities, trying to find the things that violate the clipping level, doing long tail analysis. I was doing that back in 2007 because it made sense.
It makes you wonder, Don, like what things that we do today that in 10 years or so will be the next industry buzz term that there'll be a whole bunch of vendors messaging on and creating companies about.
Well, I think that there's some potential, like for the Active Countermeasures Project and for Rita and Threat Hunter and stuff like the stuff you guys are making, technologies of that order that can actually take the idea of anomaly detection from 10 years ago that you never really delivered on. But today, since we understand the attacker behavior so much better, and we can really quantify that a lot better, that those technologies are going to be that's where it is today. And I think I think it's the Rita is the open source product that Strand and Company and Chris Brenton have built up, and I think you're working on. And then you have an active hunt product, right? That's where it's at today. Because we were doing that kind of stuff, what Rita does the hard way 10 years ago with lots of fill code and lots of Excel.
Yeah, I talk about that all the time, Don, how I wish I had the tools we have today back then.
Yeah, I mean, if I had Rita 10 years ago,
yep,
and it would have been amazing. And the fact that John basically released it without charge is it's amazing to me. I can't wait to integrate Rita into the range.
Joff.
The problem with Rita in the range is our scenarios are short 2 and 3 hour things, and Rita depends on a few days worth of analysis. So that's like I'm going to have to shoehorn it a little bit, but we really want to use it.
Yeah. I was just going to say that, on that topic, what you just said really rings true, Don. I mean, it's about, these things that you're talking about, I was doing, I think Paul was doing. Anybody came up through a university background, definitely had an exposure to performing anomaly analysis using a statistical base. And really, really looking at the data closely because you didn't have any other choices, right? It's not like you had any real security barriers in place.
Right.
And what's happening here is we finally got the computing power and the ability to implement technologies that scale up what used to take humans a heck of a lot of time to do. And I think that's the I've got some time invested in Rita and all that technology. I was there early. But that's exactly what we're doing there. We're basically saying, let's take what a human can do and scale it up to a point where it can be actual useful analysis. It's not necessarily real time, but it's useful data that a human used to have to process.
You're right about that. Yep.
Anyway.
Don, explain the illustrations in the book. And who do you do those or does someone else?
No, actually, my wife does them. My wife has a bachelor's degree in fine arts, and she taught art in public school for years and years and years, and she's back in college working on an art degree. So the illustrations are designed to have a point. Like if you look at the one that I'm most proud of is the squirrel. So this is the squirrel, and this is the chapter on threat hunting where he's wearing the sunglasses. So if you look at the squirrel picture on the alarm investigation process, he's not wearing the sunglasses. So the squirrel gets cool when he gets into the threat hunting game. But the whole idea of the squirrel is you really are distracted by many, many different avenues of investigation. And Chris Sanders actually collaborated with me a bit on this section of the book. I looked at his material. He and I talked quite a bit, and I got his permission to use some of his research in there because Chris has done some pretty solid, statistically valid analysis on what he calls the first opening move and in the investigation labyrinth. And Chris verbalized what I was trying to coach my team when I was running an MSSP practice for a couple of years. he put it really, really well. And I said, can I use that phrase? And he's like, sure. I said, great. So I pulled some of his ideas in, and between him and I, we came up with what I think is a really good chapter on how to actually teach people to understand that the very first opening move that you have in looking at data, it's either going to ruin your investigation or it's going to help you. And I had a case where a student came through the range recently, and he anchored, which is a psychological term, he anchored on the idea of looking at a process identifier because he thought there was something there. And I looked at him, and as gently as I could say, I said, that's really a great idea, but where you are in the investigation process, you have 3 other clues that have less context but have more validity, and you should really investigate those 3 clues and run them to ground in a few minutes, and then proceed and work the case. And that's actually a really good example of what I do, because the clue that he missed was this unique one-off login, which he'd seen it was on his whiteboard, and he just ignored it. And I said, how often does a standard user account directly try to log into a domain controller that's not a management of the domain and is a service account? That's an anomaly. And you only had one of those in the last 24 hours, right? Oh yeah, I just thought it was a one-off. I'm like, okay. But that event occurred 2 minutes before the SIM alarm occurred. So there's probably something there. And it's like, oh, I should investigate that. And the outcome that he achieved by coming to class and listening to me kind of coach him on this was, I really need to think about what I look into and try to get my own personal cognitive bias out. Analysis of competing hypothesis is a really, really valid, subject. And we want to look at the hypothesis we form and ensure that we have data to support which one we're going to pursue. And if we don't have some data for which one we're going to pursue, we could really be wasting time. And that does not help solve a case for a business.
Who's the audience for this book? And follow-on question to that, is it incident response in general, or is it focused on particular operating systems or technologies more so than others?
So the new book, the volume 2, it's really geared for people running security teams, doing security operations, developing a threat hunting practice, consultants doing that kind of work, like people who work for KPMG or Deloitte or something like that. The consultancy where I worked, one of my lead guys, his name is Chris. He actually carried the draft version around in his backpack all summer long because he was helping a client implement SOC, and he'd pull out my draft copy. So it's the people taking the technologies of today that we're capable now of implementing at a much lower cost, who are trying to take those technologies and do security operations and mine all this information out there. It's the folks implementing the SIM, managing the SIM, the next generation SOC person, the consultant that has to understand how to successfully deploy a large scale security point solution. There's actually a pretty good section in the book on how to do a security project. In the SANS Masters program, it's a required class, to do the project management. And I did that 12 times when I implemented SIM for an MSSP, and a lot of my little nuggets of learning are all in that section of, if you're going to be implementing a security solution, here are things that are really going to help you be successful implementing that solution. I mean, it's focused on SIM technology, but you can apply it towards anything you want.
Mm. And you said a future version of the book is going to be more akin to note-taking. I think we said that off air, Don.
Yeah. There's a number of colleges that have used the incident response book actually actively in their curriculum. And there's actually a military command who uses the book in their blue team. They've contacted me, and they've asked me how they can adapt it. And what I've decided to do and to support this is actually create a textbook version of it with about 2 inches at the top in 7x10 format, and then all the updated content I'm going to be putting in the first book. So as you go through it, you will actually be able to take notes on what's in the book, because you guys have probably all taken a college class or two. And if there's one thing that I found irksome in all of my college textbooks is I can't make a note on the page.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm willing to I should be able to do that because the book is what I'm going to be studying from, and I want to try to accommodate that. So I'm going to try to come up with a way to do that and give some margin at the top and call it a textbook edition.
Yeah, it's hard to do a digital edition on a tablet. I write on my tablet, and it's hard to get out.
Very, very
Yeah,
difficult.
well, you keep writing it in Sharpie.
Yeah, it's terrible. Terrible.
And that just really affects the quality of your iPad,
Absolutely. So, what's next now that you've done these handbooks and have these great resources?
So I have a colleague of mine who really wants to create the Blue Team content pack for a major sim, which is really kind of cool that he wants to do this and he wants to implement all the stuff. And he's really wants to take, like, I have 80 pages on implementing technical use cases, but I don't actually show you how to implement those technical use cases in QRadar or ArcSight or Elk or a major sim platform. So the idea that he and I have cooked up with, and we're finalizing our division of labor, is let's actually take this concept and let's show you how to implement this in one of the top 3 Gartner upper right sims so that you can actually see how this stuff works. So we're currently going through, we're picking out about 40 things that aren't in normal sim platform content. And then we're going to implement that. And I've taken on the idea of saying, wouldn't it be great if this stuff was available with a last alert in Elk? Because Elk is a pretty well-known tool. And obviously, if by the odd chance, if you're not aware, Justin Henderson is putting Elk on the map for the security industry with his course. So if we can figure out how to create some of these really great alerts in that platform, we can really make the open source community continue to give a run for the money for the commercial products. So you've got that idea. And then for the first incident response book, I've probably got about 30 pages of new PowerShell focused material. And when it reaches my own level of satisfaction, I'm going to merge it in there and be releasing a significant update for the first book I wrote. And it's going to have at least 30 or 40 pages of focused PowerShell. And I've talked with Chris Sanders about producing a course for him through his online learning system on a focused PowerShell for incident response course. And I guess I have to do it now since I just told you.
That's right. You said it publicly.
I did. Yeah. And that's actually one of the things that I think I wanted to tell you is that for those of you ever thinking about writing, if you don't set a date for yourself, it'll never get done.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, my date for my next edition is no later than October 2019, because I was kind of joking around with Phil Planamera and Doug Burks at the Security Onion conference and the B-Sides Augusta conference. And I said, I want to have the next book available. And he's like, we'll put that in the brochure. And I'm, Phil, I'm just kind of planning here. And he's like, no, I'm holding you to it.
How do you coach people on trusting their sources? You mentioned Sysmon earlier. Carlos Perez has come on the show and done a technical segment on bypassing and fooling Sysmon. There's a lot of advanced techniques that either manipulate or really fly under the radar, and finding those indicators are difficult, but also ones that manipulate an analyst's view of the world. How do you deal with that situation in terms of being able to trust your sources?
So we try to look at, when you're investigating a case, don't just look at one source of data. Try to look at 2, but don't go crazy and look at 15. The network itself will always tell you the truth because it has to. In order for one machine to communicate to another, it has to obey these rules. So if you're seeing activity, we were just actually working on a scenario earlier today and writing it out of the rootkit on the machine is talking on a particular TCP port, but you don't see the TCP port visible on the machine. Netstat doesn't give you the results, yet you see traffic on the LAN. So if tool A tells you nothing, but tool B tells you something, and tool B has to be reliable, then tool A has a problem.
Yeah.
So you want to then fall back and look at something else. You might actually go and say, we had this discrepancy in these tools. Let's actually go take a memory snapshot. Let's actually go take a disk triage with FTK and look at the file system and see what occurred in what order. Let's go look at a secondary source and see what went to this machine in the proxy server. But the danger of that is you really don't want to keep looking and looking and looking. You want to try to figure out which data source is going to tell me something objective that is very hard to fool. And, as you guys know, in RETA and active countermeasures, the LAN cannot lie, because in order for the malicious software to communicate, it actually must communicate on the wire. And even if it's encrypted, I can still observe a pulse behavior or a pattern of activity or some idea of how much data is going out to wherever it's going. That has to be the case.
Don, what's your assessment of the emergence of SOAR technology for incident response and really ongoing operations? What do you believe and think about the automation and orchestration that's been applied to these basically things that SOC analysts would have to do on a daily basis?
So we actually did some SOAR stuff before SOAR was a word back in 2011. We had a
hold on. What else did you do back in 2007 to 2011 that we can make into a product company today that we're not talking about? We got threat hunting. We got SOAR. I feel like there's other things there, Don, that we may not have productized yet.
Think about that, because I took a class from Chris Brenton. I know he's a sharp cookie. I know Larry, and I know you, and you guys are sharp cookies. So maybe there's some icing we can put on that cake.
There you go.
Of course, because Larry was talking about his birthday, so I have to have a birthday-related analogy, right? I don't want to leave Larry out of this.
Nice.
Well, if you're going to carbo load before you take your black belt test, you want to carbo load with precision.
Cake,
right?
yeah, cake.
Anyway, SOAR. So when you're trying to do this automation thing, right, and you're trying to get system A to talk to system B, you really have to make sure that you're looking at a clickstream process, and you have to find a repeatable clickstream process that you're going to execute. And if you can encapsulate that and you do it in a third of the cases, you've got a reason to be using SOAR. Mm-hmm. Here's one that we did, and we did this. Art actually Art's the guy who came down from TrustWave. I had the notion that whenever we looked up a case, we frequently pulled data from a directory, and we had to determine which one of 3 active directories we pulled the data from. So we decided that what we were going to do was keep an inventory of the last 24 hours of login activity, which is a 4624 event off a domain controller, and keep track of the person's IP and where they authenticated from, and then make a best guess, and with some other data. And what Art did was he created an automation for us so that whenever you opened up the alert figured out where the user's account was, because we're talking about non-user attributable data, right? This IP address was used, who authenticated from it, who from what domain, what's the user list, so we have a human being to talk to. If there's one thing that I coach people through, it's you want user attributable data more than you want anything else, because if you can get user attributable data, you have a person you can talk to, and the adversaries after the person nowadays are not after your storage network.
Well, they're after maybe not the person, but their credentials and their level, their role and access in the organization, for sure.
Exactly. But they're not. It's not like 15 years ago where they wanted to compromise the HP printers at Los Alamos Lab. It's about, I want to compromise your workstation because we think you're the privileged entity that has access to the database, because you're the guy that has the data and I want your data. So that's what they're going after, right?
Yeah, in Active Directory, that matters a lot less lately. You really just need any user, and then you can pivot from there pretty stealthily, as I learned.
Yeah, you really can. But back to SOAR. So what Art implemented for us was this really nice lookup feature that connected a bunch of dots for us. So when you opened up an alarm, it pulled down all of the data that we commonly looked for in the directory and gave it to me in a nice, beautiful list. And then the other thing it gave me was their login history of how often they had logged in from where over the last 24 hours. Mm-hmm. So those types of automation tasks to push information to the analyst, because once you have that, then you can push button do an analysis later on. And we had a feature, and I was really proud of this. Monty McDougall wrote this pretty cool tool called Windows Forensics Tool Chest back in the day, like 10 years ago, 12 years ago. Early, maybe, I don't know, mid 2000s. So we created a feature that when we right-clicked, it went out and did a complete breakdown and analysis and pulled, today what you can go and look at in Carbon Black, it pulled all of that data back from a machine. Its process state, its process list, its network connections, ran all these command line tools for us and dropped it off on a time-dated directory location. So we had a record of that. And that's very much SOAR. It's like, I want to go get the end
Good Lord,
system.
yeah, and that's another product vendor, actually.
Yeah.
And I'll plug them because I have a call coming up with their founder who's a big fan of the show. Polarity overlays information, contextual information on your screen is a very poor explanation of it, but essentially similar to what you're talking about is pulling in that contextual information. Awake Security does something very similar. Don, you and I should chat because I think we could create the next successful security startup based on your knowledge and expertise, because you've been hitting the nail on the head. Stuff that you've done years ago has been productized by so many security vendors today.
Yeah, and truthfully, that's why I wrote the next book, is because in my career because I've been fortunate. I've had a lot of really great SANS training. Thank you, Stephen Northcutt and Company, and Ed and Mike Poor and Justin. All that's been poured into me, and I did the work to get the credential. That's
Is
true,
that a pun? Is that a pun intended? Been poured into you?
That's right. That's right. Mike poured into me.
Nice. I had Mike as an instructor as well.
As well as poured into you too.
Yes.
Yeah.
He did. Several times.
I've had that experience.
Right. By the way, I got my Jeff hat, just to let you guys know.
Oh, there it is.
Nice.
Cool.
So, I put a lot of stuff to work, and it's good stuff. I mean, it's really good education, and it really, really works.
That's awesome.
But I have to tell you a funny Mike Poor story.
Everyone that knows Mike Poor
So,
has a funny Mike Poor story, largely because Mike Poor's personality is larger than life.
Yeah.
So, you know how Randy Marchani at Virginia Tech has a program where if you're part of an EDU, you can take a SANS class in the spring semester
Yes.
inexpensively. And this year, it's Justin Henderson teaching Sec 555, which is great. I mean, if you're as a commercial, if you're an EDU person, go out to Tech. It's a great campus, and Randy has a really good food bag, etc. So, Mike is doing the discussion, and they had the slide up where it's the Verbo machine talking to another one. So he presents the slide, he talks about it, and he pauses to collect his thought for the next thing he wants to say. And in a room of 272 university people, Mike pauses, and some guy stands up in the back and says, "Hey, I think my system dated that system last week." And Mike looked at the screen and he laughed so hard that we thought we were going to have to call 911. He walked around the corner of the room, and you could just see his whole body shaking up and down, and he was laughing so hard he couldn't breathe. It was awesome.
That's awesome. That's Mike.
Yeah, it's a great Mike Poor story. Oh yeah.
I think there's better ones that we certainly cannot air on the show.
Right.
Or we
but
could.
Mine is funny, and you can always say my system dated Verbo, and that's a pretty good one.
Nice.
It's awesome.
You're reminding me of the late 2007-8 period, because I met both Mike Poor and Ed Scotus, and both times I first met them was at Virginia Tech. So it was Randy's program that introduced me to the community too. So
I think Randy, he has I think he's the longest consistent SANS instructor in the program. I mean, Randy and I have worked on cases together. That's one of the cool things when you work for for a Virginia university, is you get to meet some really amazing people that have done some pretty cool stuff. You really do.
Don, when we do some of our other shows like Enterprise Security Weekly, we ask the security vendors not just about their perspective on the problem and how they're solving problems for people, and that's all well and good. But we now ask them, by listener request, to tell a story.
we're like, okay, well, like, we get you. We know your product. Like, we may have seen the demo. You know, we've maybe done briefings. We've maybe talked to a customer. But from the vendor, we want to know your success story. Tell me a success story where someone purchased your product, they implement it, they solved a problem. We want to know the success story. Do you have a success story for your book?
As a matter of fact, yes, I do. And the gentleman has actually posted it in one of the Amazon reviews.
That's awesome.
There's a section in the book, and I wrote this down. It's on page 23, and it's item F, G, and H. And it talks about enterprise data inventory survey, or EDIS. I just came up with an acronym because I had to have one. So he asked me to unpack this for him, and I call him on the phone. He used the contact form. And in talking with him and explaining to him how in order to have a really successful SOC, you have to understand the data, tie the data to the value chain, or excuse me, tie the data to the application and the application to the value chain. In order to do that, to provide really good monitoring that's relevant to the business, you have to understand the application portfolio. And what he explained to me is that it's a state agency, so this is at the state level, of which we have 50 states in the United States. He basically explained to me in this conversation that they have taken their entire library of services of what they provide all the individual state agencies, because their security operations team is centralized at the state level like it is in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And they've revamped everything, and they're now using my use case library in the template format that's actually in the book and the way that I wrote the sample to explain the value and the services that they provide to the individual subordinate agencies in their state. And he said they're in 2 months, they're actually now meeting with Success, and they're getting folks who are more willing to talk with the central security team about monitoring. And I don't know about you guys, but that to me makes every hour I put into the book really, really worth it, because it says he recognized the need, saw the value, understand the format, I communicated it well, and they're revamping their entire program to do it. There's another gentleman, and he actually has a review on Amazon as well, and I talked to him. He runs an MSSP out in California. He has 40 analysts, and he bought them each a copy of the book and made it mandatory reading. There's another gentleman who has an adversary simulation product, and he said, this book is mandatory reading because this is the other side of the equation of people who are detecting our product. So in order for you to understand what the blue team is, to be a better red team person, you have to understand, at least in Don's mind, what you can detect with modern tools. So I guess that's like in triplicate. I guess I gave you 3 stories. Does that mean I get like a coin or something?
I think you get to play 5 questions.
Hey,
Because I don't think when you were on the last time that we had 5 questions.
And if we did, they were probably drastically different.
They could have been different 5 questions. So, Don, are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
I got my answer. Yes, I do. I'm ready.
Alrighty. The first one is 3 words to describe yourself.
Congenial, document, and puntastic.
Did you prepare for this segment, Don?
Dude, yes, because the last time when you asked me these questions, I was like, you really caught me off guard with one of them, and I was so embarrassed. I'm like, I'm not going to be embarrassed again. I'm going to go look at a previous show, and I'm going to see what questions Paul's going to ask me. And
Does not surprise me. So you're ready for question 2, which is, if you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Tom Liston's La Brea tar pit, because I want you to die low and slow.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Puns, Packets, and Passion, keeping it light while we find the bad guy.
In the popular game of Ask Grabby Grabby, do you prefer to go first or second?
Second, because that's the blue team way, because we're responding to an incident.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, living, or otherwise.
So actually, this one I had to think about because, there's lots of great celebs out there, but it really is Ben Franklin and Grace Hopper. Because Grace Hopper, she's the person that we hear about in college. Many people don't know it, but she actually was one of the earliest women in the military, in the reserves, to actually get a PhD in mathematics. And so not only was she determined, and she fought against adversity. Grace Hopper went into a completely male-dominated world of the United States military. I mean, how many women were in the military in 1944, 1945, 46?
Mm-mm.
You know, they were nurses, and, you know, and today that's not the case. Today they fly combat helicopters. And she fought against that adversity. She got a highly advanced degree. She created some amazing tools, and she is, you know, one of the founders of modern computing. And more importantly, she fought against adversity. And I've had to struggle with adversity all my life, you know, deal with handicaps. And I just like, Grace Hopper's it. And Ben Franklin, because he's got his 13 virtues. And, you know, Ben Franklin said something that's really shaped my entire life. He said, most people die at age 25. It takes their body 40 years to catch up.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And what he's talking about is people stop learning at age 25.
And see, when you said 13 virtues, I thought you almost said 13 virgins, because I was like, wait, what? This is going somewhere unexpected.
No. And I was thinking root DNS.
Yeah.
Well, the book is Blue Team Handbook, the Incident Response Edition, a condensed field guide for the cyber security incident responder by, of course, none other than Don Murdock. Don, thank you very much for appearing again on Pulse Security Weekly.
Thank you.
And thanks for bringing the VeggieTales back to us.
Yes, it's classic. Larry, that concludes this episode of Pulse Security Weekly.
It's all backwards.
Take us out. I know it's
over and out. I don't know what to do.